And they're trusting you with a $50 million plane.
Right. Eventually, just a half a second difference. I'm not sitting here on your podcast today. List on my phone, 13 of my buddies that I lost along the way. First thing, don't feel sorry for a veteran. I loved my time in service.
Welcome to the Alex Perry on Fire podcast. Today is a first for us because we have yet to have anyone from the military on the podcast. And we don't just have anyone from the military. We have what I think is Top Gun. And I couldn't be more excited to hear kind of about your journey and also what goes on after the military and what that looks like. So Jerry, Darren, welcome to the Alex Perry on Fire podcast.
Thank you, Alex. Excited to be here.
I'm going to go right at it. How does one become a fighter pilot for the Navy?
So there are a number of different channels you can go down. First you have to become an officer, right? So in the military, regardless of branch, there's a hierarchy, right? There's officers, there's non-commissioned officers, which is basically enlisted who have moved up through the ranks and are the higher ranking enlisted members. And then there are the enlisted ranks, which is, those are the folks that make things happen. So in a fighter squadron, they're the ones that are maintaining the jets, that are fueling the aircraft, that are doing the administration, the supply, the logistics. So first thing you have to do is you have to become an officer. And there's several different routes you can take. I went to the Naval Academy, which graduates about 1,000 graduates every year that go into the Navy and Marine Corps. You can also go through ROTC. So I think SMU has an ROTC program. I don't know if they have Navy, but so depends on the school. Some have Navy, some have Army, some have Air Force. Navy, of course, is Marine Corps as well. And so you can go through ROTC. So after your 4 years, you're commissioned as an officer, or you can go to officer candidate school. So that's a competitive process. You have to have a college degree first, and then you have to pass all the physical, the medical, interview, academic, and then you can go through officer candidate school. If you pass that and make it through that series of academics, physical, military bearing, and training, then you become an officer. So
yeah, so it's not as easy as just flying. And
right. No, you just don't raise your right hand and sign up. So you have to become an officer first, and then you have to be selected to be an aviator and go to flight school. So that requires you to be physically and medically qualified. There's other physiological things that can prevent you from becoming a pilot. You can be too tall, you can be too short, you can have allergies, anything like that is going to disqualify you. And then once you get a slot to go to flight school, which is very competitive, then of course you have to make it through flight school and pass and eventually earn your wings of gold. And then from there you go on to your specific platform, whether you're flying helicopters or fighters or transport or anti-submarine.
So I imagine it's extremely competitive to get to that level.
It is.
And again, I only go back, I remember, because I think Top Gun was one of the most incredible recruiting tools for the Navy.
Absolutely.
And I grew up young watching it, and every kid my age was dreaming, I'm going to be a fighter pilot. And they said, well, do you have 20/20 vision? And I'm like, I don't think so. I'm like, well, then you're not going to be a fighter pilot. Or are you incredible at mathematics? And I was like, what does that have to do with it? Because I didn't understand that. I probably still don't understand what goes into the mathematics of flying these airplanes.
Yeah. Well, they're incredibly complex aircraft. As the pilot in command, you've got a lot of responsibility, right? There are 30, 40, $50 million platforms. And again, incredibly complex. So you don't have to know how to build the aircraft. You don't have to know how to design and engineer the aircraft, but you have to understand how it works. You have to understand how it operates so that when things don't go well or things go bad, you understand the systems, you understand the ramifications, how to handle it as a pilot. And so having a very strong technical background with a strong foundation in engineering, mathematics, science, physics, aerodynamics, all that plays into just being a very capable pilot.
Yeah, and are you kind of learning on different aircrafts all along the way till you get to this certain level?
Yeah, everyone starts, you walk before you run, right? So you don't just jump into a Super Hornet, right? You start out now. Today's pilots, student naval aviators start out in a T6 Texan, which is still a very high performance and complex aircraft, but it's single engine, it's turboprop. There's, student front, instructor in back, fully aerobatic. I think it's a 7 or 8G platform, so it's high performance. But, it only goes 250 miles an hour. So relatively slow versus a Super Hornet. And then you progress up. And then from there, if you're going to become a fighter pilot, then you start flying what's called a T-45, which is a single engine subsonic jet that can land on an aircraft carrier, that can drop practice bombs, that can simulate air-to-air engagements. So you really start to, get into sort of the concepts, the foundation of being a fighter pilot. And then from there, you get your wings. You also learn how to fly at night in bad weather, how to land on an aircraft carrier. So you've got the foundation that you need to be a fleet carrier-based fighter pilot. Then you graduate from that and go into specific F-18 training, or now a lot of graduates are going to fly the F-35, which is the Joint Strike Fighter.
And I'm sure you've flown a lot of airplanes. What was your favorite airplane to fly, or is still?
Well, it's an easy answer because I was an FA-18 guy. I flew two variants, the Legacy Hornet, which was the C model, and then I got about 100 hours in the E model, which is the Super Hornet. It's about 30% bigger. And the Legacy Hornet was my favorite. It was, while the Super Hornet has more capabilities, better stealth, longer range, more capacity, the Legacy Hornet was more of a Ferrari. The Super Hornet's a little bit more of a Suburban. It's what you want to fly if you're going downtown, but if you want to go for a joyride, the Legacy
And
Hornet
how fast are you going in that?
I mean, you can go, top speed is 1.8 Mach, which is about 1,400 miles an hour. It's pretty rare that you would get even close to that, just because most scenarios, training or combat, just don't lend itself to that. But I think 1.5 is about the fastest I saw, which was, 1,300 miles an hour.
And I guess, tell me, at what age did you take off from a aircraft carrier?
I was 23.
I mean, what's that? What's that like?
Oh,
is there no fear?
No, it's incredible. Now, daytime, when you get launched off the front, because you go from 0 to 150 in about a second and a half. It's unlike any acceleration anyone else gets to experience. So it's fantastic. Daytime is a lot of fun. Nighttime is not so much fun, because especially when there's no moon, no horizon, which is the case a lot of times. You're in the middle of the ocean, and if there's a marine layer or it's a moonless night, you walk out on the flight deck and you can't tell up from down. You've never seen black like that. So getting launched into the abyss, it's like diving into a vat of black ink. And so that's not as much fun. Now, landing is a completely different story. Daytime landing gets to be pretty fun because you get good at it, and you've got all your peripheral vision. You've always got a good sense of the horizon. You're never going to get vertigo, and you get pretty good at it. And so daytime landings are a lot of fun. Nighttime is always a challenge. Again, some nights are better. You've got a moon, you've got a horizon, but other nights you're coming down the chute and it is so black, and you look around and it's just blackness. And you look out in the distance and you're 8 or 10 miles away and you see this little white dot, and that's the aircraft carrier. And that's where you're going to go land. And it looks really small, really right up into till the very end. There's a saying that an arrested landing on an aircraft carrier, 3 things happen at once. It's like being in a car wreck. It's shitting your pants and having an orgasm all at once.
Okay. Yeah, damn. But at 23, is it just a level of confidence in what you've been trained? This is what you're supposed to do. There is no time for fear, right?
There's no time for fear.
Questioning yourself.
Well, there is time for fear. And believe me, the first time I did it, the first time I landed on an aircraft carrier by myself. First of all, you're by yourself. No instructor is dumb enough to go with you in your back seat, because things can go bad really fast. But again, everything is a building block approach. So you're not going to be put in that situation until you've been built up and trained so you know what you're doing. It doesn't mean you're not nervous. You fly out there to the aircraft carrier for the first time and take a look down and think, oh my gosh, I'm going to go land on that thing. But after you've done it, 5 or 6 times, you start to think, hey, this training actually is working. And this is actually pretty fun. Again, the nighttime never really becomes fun, but you get pretty good.
And they're trusting you with a $50 million plane.
Right. Eventually, if you make it to that point.
Obviously some stuff's confidential. Is there a story, and I'm sure people ask, is there a story that comes to mind that kind of defines something that happened, whether it be in training or live combat or something where you're like, look, that was a defining moment in my military career?
I mean, I think if you had any fighter pilot sitting in this seat, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, everyone has close calls. Things are happening fast. You're flying a high performance airplane, and in everything in the military, it doesn't matter if you're a fighter pilot, you're a Navy SEAL, you're a Army infantry officer. If you are in what we refer to as combat arms, or you're in an operational unit, you have to train like you fight. And that results in you have to put yourself in real life, real world, potentially combat related scenarios. And those are dangerous. And again, I've got a handful of close calls where, just a half a second difference, and I'm not sitting here on your podcast today. And in fact, and I don't want to get too deep here, but Memorial Day will be coming up here in May, and I've got a list on my phone, and it's of 13 of my buddies that I lost along the way. And when I think back about the different scenarios that led to their demise, with the exception of 2 of the 13, only 2 of them were operational, actually in combat scenarios. The other 11 were training. A couple of them were air shows that either Blue Angels or other air show performers, but most of them were training, because again, you have to take it to the kind of the edge of the envelope so that you're ready.
Like
when,
it was written,
when the call comes.
How do you go, especially if it was during your career? What's the mental side of losing? That's a lot of people. That's a lot of friends to lose. And doing something that you're doing. Are you taught? Is there psychology to get over it? Are there therapists when something like that happens? I mean,
they're probably better about it now than they were back in my day. But the one thing that, well, number one, you have to grieve, right? You have to go through that process. The good thing about being in the military, while you're still in the military, is you have that brotherhood, right? So you have those folks to lean on, and everyone's at the memorial service, and it's there's a lot of tears, but then there's a lot of alcohol, and there's a lot of remembrance, and a lot of raising a glass to a fallen brother. And so I think, believe it or not, that's part of the appeal of being in the military is that there is an element of danger, right? Now, you don't ever want to be the one that goes, and you certainly don't want to lose your friends, but it's part of the appeal of wanting to be a fighter pilot, wanting to be a Navy SEAL, wanting to be in special forces, or you name it. And so it kind of comes with the territory, and that sort of going into it. As a pilot, we were taught compartmentalization. So when it comes to once you are, preparing for a brief and a flight, you're taught and trained to just forget about everything. Your cell phone we didn't have cell phones back then, but your cell phone doesn't go in there. You're not checking emails, after the brief started. You are 100% focused. You're not thinking about, the fight you had with your wife last night, or your child that's home sick with the flu. You are 100% focused on the mission, because if you're not, bad things are going to happen. So I think, compartmentalization is something that was really pounded into us early on and re-emphasized, especially after an incident where you lose someone or someone has a mishap. Maybe they get out okay, but it's a reminder that you have to be 100% focused on the task.
Because again, it goes to move. There's just this element when you get in the plane, like, I'm good at what I do. I know that I'm good. And I'm gonna show it.
Well, you have to be confident, because you can't go out and do something dangerous or go fly in crappy weather or at night on night vision goggles on a low level mission. If you're scared and you're not confident and don't think you're capable of carrying out the mission. So you have to be confident, but if you get overconfident, then that's when bad things often happen. So you always have to have a healthy respect for the danger.
Anyone in life, whether we're a fighter pilot or not, has a close call, right? I could think of 2 close calls I had where I'm like, damn, that was lucky. Like, whether it be in a car or some other experience, right? But because you kind of lose that thought right away, maybe not the same gratitude you'd have of saying like you just said, there could have been a lot of different instances where you weren't sitting in this chair. Did you take that on after you left the military?
I probably don't think about it every day, but there's certainly certain times. Obviously, Memorial Day, Veterans Day is a good reminder. Anything that's where there's a patriotic cause for celebration, or when I have an opportunity to get together with some of my former brothers in arms, whether it's a Blue Angel reunion or a Blue Angel Foundation board meeting, or just a text stream that I'm on with some of my old wingmen. That's a kind of a constant reminder. And names of those that we lost along the way are often referenced and brought up. And so, we don't forget about them.
And you and I kind of touched on this before we even started. You asked me what the Alex Perry on Fire podcast was about. And I said, like, some of it is the ability to express things we haven't expressed or we don't talk about. Do you find that, like, because you said you've lost people, or even said, alcohol, have some drinks, the coping mechanisms of when you're in the military, you just said you got to turn things off, right?
Right.
Kids, wife, whatever it may be, husbands, right? This element of living in a certain way and being a certain way. How does that, or how have you found that to transition out of that, right? You've got this brotherhood, as you just said, but what happens when that ends, when your term comes up or you decide you want a different life?
Yeah. Well, and I think, I know we're going to get into this later, but I think that's one of the big challenges that military veterans have as they transition out of uniform and into the civilian world. And maybe not for everyone, right? If you're a doctor in the military and now you're a doctor at a hospital, you've got your team, you're speaking the same language, it probably feels pretty similar, right? But if you are part of a cohesive operational unit where you got each other's backs and you're doing something really important but intense and dangerous, chances are you're not going to go to a similar setting, and you're going to miss that brotherhood and that camaraderie and that bond and that support network, right? And so now you find yourself in a different world. A lot of people don't understand what you did. The motivation of the people that you're working with is probably very different than the motivation of the people that you worked with in the military. The mission of your company or organization is probably very different than the mission of being in the military. And so that's hard for a lot of folks. And I know, I found it to be challenging. It wasn't so much me. I think it was a bigger challenge for my family, my wife and me, because every time we got relocated, we moved a lot. But as soon as you show up to your new squadron, your new assignment, within a month, they're having a party and you're the guest of honor. Like, welcome to your new squadron. These are your friends for the next 2 or 3 years. And that didn't happen here. And it just took a long time to find friends and find common ground. And you still never found, other than a few veterans that I knew, no one ever really understood, what you were a part of or what that was like.
Are you saying if those were people who were outside of the military to kind of get into that side of society? So just if you were living on the military side, that was easy. Everyone kind of had this brotherhood. But if you got outside of it, they couldn't really relate to what you were doing and going through.
Exactly.
And then I'd imagine, and I'm not comparing you to Olympic athletes and all this stuff, but you have this high. I mean, flying fighter jets or being a Navy SEAL or secret missions, right? It could make kind of life boring on the outside.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, there's no question about it.
And like, how do you find that high, or take those chances or whatever it may be?
Right.
and they
Yeah.
still experience life that way. I mean, I would bet that's hard to then make that change.
It's really less about taking risks. That of course was exhilarating, and walking out to a $30 million jet that's got your name on it. It's like, wow, this is a pretty good day at the office. So you'll never replace that, and you sort of are okay with that. I think the bigger void is just not being part of a brotherhood, being part of an organization that holds itself, to very high standards, holds itself accountable. Because if you don't, you're not going to be effective, and if you get called, you're just not going to be, very effective at your mission. So it's different.
That makes sense. And you hear so much of people coming out of the military and the PTSD with the military. I listened to a podcast the other day with Joe Rogan and Rick Perry talking about, was it Ibogaine or something like that, and getting that to the military for just PTSD. And I guess I was naive to how many people actually need help once they come out to feel right again, to go back into society where it's not part of this brotherhood. Did you find that when you left, it was kind of an easy transition, or did you struggle at all with that transition?
Yeah, I think my struggles were certainly less. I definitely didn't have PTSD. I think my bigger struggles were, just not being part of something bigger than myself. I mean, I was, left the military and went to a big Wall Street firm. And so that was certainly bigger than me. But in terms of what, the objective of the organization and my role at that organization, it was to make money, right? Very different than defending the freedom and defending our country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Very different mission, very different purpose. So as you get up in the morning in the military, you put on your uniform, you see yourself in the mirror, you know that you're doing something really important. On the flip side, you put on your nice suit, look yourself in the mirror and say, well, it's time to go out and see if I can make more money today.
Yeah.
Very different mindset.
100%. And I'm sure you have to find the challenge of, okay, this is a new challenge. It's a new chapter of my life. How do I make this part of my life? And I guess bring in the other sides of it, right? The gratitude, the awareness of what you've been through, and kind of take what you've learned there. And obviously very different. Was your family more appreciative, I guess, that you were home more, or different life? And you get the benefits of that, right? And I think you mentioned you have a couple kids as well.
Yeah, 3 kids.
Was that kind of a mindset and a life changed, or was what led to your eventual saying, okay, you were in the military for how many years?
13 years active.
13 active. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what went into okay, now it's time to try something else?
Yeah, it was really, the decision was almost made for me. I had a back injury.
Okay.
For me to continue to fly ejection seat aircraft, I would have had to have surgery with no guarantee that I would be able to continue to do that. At that point, we had 3 kids, ages 4, 3, and 1, I think, somewhere close to that. And, just looking at the next 7+ years, I was going to be gone a lot of that. And it was between the medical side, my back, my uncertainty about flight status, and then my family, who had been so supportive through it all. I just decided it was time. It was a sign.
I love it. So, and you were at peace with that, obviously.
I was. And to this day, I have no regrets for the 13 years that I was in the military, and I have no regrets that I decided to get out when I did.
Was the injury at all related to flying, or was it?
It was. Yeah, it was from the G-forces, the constant compression on my spine. And so I'm sure I had, some disc issues to begin with that I was really pretty asymptomatic, but as part of our training, we had to get into a centrifuge on a regular basis to test your ability to counter G-forces. And it was in that device, and no pilot enjoys that. It's like, oh gosh, I got to go through the centrifuge. It's painful.
Well, can you describe what is the highest G-force? Maybe explain to the audience what a G-force is, and then explain maybe in layman's terms what that might feel like.
Right. So the G-forces, I mean, everyone's been on a roller coaster. So, when you get to the bottom of a steep descent and then you start to climb again, your blood wants to keep going down, but the roller coaster has you going back up. And so it's kind of that same thing. It's the blood is being pulled to your lower extremities. And so you need to counter that by trying to push the blood back up to your heart and to your brain, because if you don't, you can pass out. And a lot of pilots have been killed because of that. So it's really important training. But in terms of what it feels like, if you're pulling 7 or 8 Gs, I'm 200 plus pounds. Now it feels like, I'm 1,400 pounds. Just to lift your arm up is incredibly difficult, right? So this 15-pound arm now weighs 85 pounds or whatever the number is. And so it is incredibly intense. It's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. And it's why you have to stay in great top physical shape as a fighter pilot. You have to do a lot of cardio. You have to do a lot of weight training because you have to have those muscles and the endurance to be able to constantly counter those G forces.
Is there psychological training too that goes into all this?
Not into countering G forces. That's pure physics.
Okay.
100%, not psychological. I think more of the psychological training, they don't call it psychological training, but again, it's that mindset of compartmentalization, of being very task oriented, procedurally oriented, so that if you have an emergency, the immediate, the bold-face items that need to be taken care of immediately, and then what other things can you kind of wind the clock and say, all right, now let's assess the situation, no fast hands in the cockpit, and determine what you need to do. So I wouldn't call it psychological training, but it's more mindset and procedural.
Yeah, and I was almost thinking like the ability to control your breathing or bring your blood back as almost a process to say,
yeah,
all right, I know what I'm doing, or I know when this is plunging,
sure,
and I won't be able to recover from that.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's absolutely techniques, the physiological techniques that you use to counter the G forces. And if you don't have the proper technique, you're not going to be as effective.
And I've only seen it mostly in movies, not live, but you said there wasn't someone in the cockpit with you. From what I've seen, there is. Is that a misnomer, usually by yourself in these planes?
Depends on the platform. So I was an F-18 pilot, and I was single seat the whole time. Early on, they've got 2-seaters for an instructor, but once you have 2 or 3 flights under your belt, you're by yourself. Now you always have a flight lead, and that's usually your instructor. So yeah, you're by yourself. So you're relying on yourself. Now you can rely on your wingman if you need him to break out a checklist and kind of back you up procedurally. You certainly provide mutual support, but in terms of being in the aircraft yourself, you're alone and unafraid.
I've read a book or books about SEALs or Marines who can kind of control the room without talking and speaking. I've seen Blue Angel videos where how fast are these planes going, and they're how far apart?
Yeah, most maneuvers are 300 to 400 miles per hour. Some faster than that, and it depends on the maneuver, but sometimes they're as close as 12 inches. So.
Which is to me, that's unfathomable.
Yeah.
How do you have I've seen this. Actually seen it. How do you have the wherewithal to know that moving, the tip of a wing or moving the slightest could cause crash and all that stuff? Where does that come from? You say training, but like you've got to have some sort of sense, right? Or are you relying solely on the avionics of the plane? Or what?
Well, there's no avionics. No, you push the envelope, especially in air-to-air or air combat maneuvers. And, I think a lot of people, you see Top Gun, you see these things, and you think it's all about speed and high G. Sometimes it's who can fly the slowest and force the other person to kind of flush out in front. And to fly really slow, you have to fly at the edge of the envelope. You're right on the edge of losing control of the airplane. It's all what we refer to as monkey skills. It's purely your sight picture and stick and rudder. There's no computers, avionics, autopilot that make that happen. Now, the Blue Angel discussion is a whole other discussion, because every fighter pilot knows how to fly formation. And they can fly close formation. Sometimes you have to penetrate through, a really thick cloud layer together. And so you got to snuggle right up onto that person's wing so you don't lose sight in the clouds. So every fighter pilot knows how to fly precision formation. The Blue Angels, of course, take it to another level because it's precision formation with 4 or 6 planes in very close proximity, not just going through a cloud layer, but doing loops and rolls and spins and all that. So the Blue Angel conversation it's probably a whole other podcast, but just like everything in naval aviation, it's a building block approach, right? So when I joined the team as a Blue Angel, the first thing I had to learn was just how do I march out to the airplane? How do I climb into the airplane? Because everything's a show, right? You're on performance, you're performing all the time. How do you start up? How do you taxi? How do you turn the smoke on and off together? How do you just do basic turns and reversals together? Because the Blue Angels use slightly different and more specific checkpoints that allow you to perceive even more precise deviations from your position. So it's a building block approach. It takes months and months and repetition, and you start, further away, and then over time you slowly move in closer and closer, and you build trust, you build discipline. If you're not having a good day or you mismatch a turn or the start of a roll, you turn your smoke off. You can basically, it's like confession to your fellow wingman. Hey, I'm not flying this maneuver very well. You call clear, and it's a debrief item. And then you spend a lot of time in the debrief, just going through every single maneuver, and it's all videotape. So you're watching, frame by frame to see where you can get better. So it's a building block approach, and literally you're working on it the entire season.
Interesting. What do you think you've taken from the military, your 13 years, into the life you've lived after it that really has allowed you? And I want to say you look very positive. You look happy. There's good energy. I mean, that's just what I'm feeling. And you feel it seems like you're at peace with where you're at. What do you think has really helped you get from that spot to where you are today?
Yeah. There's so much to be gleaned and taken from the military and applied to almost any sector or any job in the civilian world. One thing that I've really tried to focus on is making sure I'm surrounding myself with great people. Be part of a great team, and to the extent that I have a say in who's on my team, I'm not necessarily looking for the resume. I'm not looking for necessarily the best school. All that stuff's important and that gets you in the door. But, I'm looking for integrity. I'm looking for commitment to the mission. I'm looking for, people that are willing to raise their hand and say, you know what, I screwed up. People that aren't going to try to bury something or hide it. So, people that aren't too proudful, that are too egotistical to think, well, I'm always right. Right. So I want to work with people that are humble. So I think selecting your team and being thoughtful about how you select your team is really important. I think it's also important to have a culture of gratitude. And, I take that from the Blue Angels tour, which you would think it'd be easy to be grateful every day you get to walk in wearing your Superman suit and, shiny blue jet with your name on it. But it was a really hard tour, and the flying was intense. It was the hardest flying I ever did. The debriefs were very professional, but also very candid, and they were long. The pace of the show season was crazy. A lot of people say it's like being, the physical challenges of being a professional athlete, but with the schedule of a rock star. And you do that for an entire season. And so it can wear you down. So we really focused on a culture of gratitude. So every day, you walk into the squad, and the first thing that we would do is we would just walk around and shake everyone's hand and say good morning. And, at the end of every debrief, again, the debriefs were sometimes pretty candid and pretty pointed, but we would always literally say, I'm glad to be here. And just sort of that reminder of, hey, we have this opportunity to be a part of something really special. It's really hard, but let's not forget how lucky we are to be here. And so I try to bring that sense of gratitude to, wherever I work, and to be grateful for the teammates that I work with, for, if they do something for me, I try to remind myself, hey, make sure you thank them and tell them how much, you appreciate them and how important they are to the team.
Yeah, I imagine, as you said it with the Blue Angels, there's still a lot of risk. And you said you lost some friends in that. Does your family still encourage it because it keeps you kind of that mindset that where you've come from? and flying, but there's got to be some fear factor with that.
You know, there really was never any fear. I had more close calls and more scary situations flying gray jets than I did blue jets. And I think part of it was, you're flying with the same group of 6 every single day. And you can tell in the first maneuver or two that, hey, you know what, 2's not having a great day today. You just know it. You can hear it in their voice. You can see it. And you encourage each other and you get through it. But because you're with the same pilots every day, you almost know what's going to happen before it happens, right?
Interesting. So out of the military, excuse me, I read that you're involved with the Blue Angel Foundation. What does that entail?
Yeah, so the Blue Angel Foundation, our mission is to raise money to support wounded veterans. And the wounds can be visible, they can be invisible. We also help with career transitions. So, mentoring, coaching, transitional housing for folks that have special needs because of injuries perhaps they sustained. So we do a lot to raise money to support organizations that are focused to helping our veterans. And, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, just because we're no longer a nation at war right now doesn't mean people aren't getting hurt, right? You've got to train like you fight. And unfortunately, people are getting hurt in live fire exercises, jumping out of perfectly good airplanes, and doing the things that you have to do to be ready to go.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it is the Alex Perry on Fire podcast, and you've hit on a lot of things that fire you up. But is there something that on the daily really fires you up?
In my personal life?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that fires me up the most is my family. I mean, it's my 13 years in service, obviously loved my family, but I was constantly pulled away from them. And I think because of that, I appreciate my family, my wife, much more than I would have if I just, not to say that's a bad thing, but if I had gone to school and went right to work and never had to be away from my wife and kids for more than, a day or two for a conference. So I think my appreciation and just my passion for my family is probably the thing that gets me the most excited.
And do you want them to go into the military, or how does that look?
Well, I have two daughters and a son. My daughters no, I don't think it would be a good fit for them. My son is 21. He's in college. And, I would love it if he decided to do it, but it has to be his idea. Can't be my idea. And for me, I just had a call to serve. And I also had just this laser focus objective of being a Navy fighter pilot. And so those two things really drove me.
Did you have family in the military prior to you going?
I had a grandfather served in World War II, an uncle who was a Navy pilot, flew in Vietnam, and he was one of my childhood heroes. To this day, it's just, I think about my Uncle Brody, and he was just one of the coolest guys I ever knew. So not a lot of military in my family, but enough to know that that sounded really interesting to me, and I looked up to those folks.
And at what age were you like, I want to fly these planes? Or did you see something or experience something
Yes.
that said, this is it?
I went to an air show. I was 14 years old. My dad took me to an air show, and I saw an F-14 come by right on the deck, just under the speed of sound. And then he pulled up, lit the afterburners, and just went straight up until you couldn't see him anymore. And I said, Dad, that's what I want to do. And then, of course, you mentioned Top Gun earlier. That came out my sophomore year in high school, and I was already sort of going down that road. And as cheesy as it sounds, it was like, yeah, that's definitely what I want to do.
Did you have any serious roadblocks to getting there? A lot of people said, this is what I want to do. Was it easy for you, or did what?
It wasn't. I mean, it wasn't easy. I did have a medical condition with one of my ears that I was concerned was going to be a factor, and then once I got through the academy, which was not a lot of fun, but it was in hindsight, it was a great experience. But when I showed up to flight school, when I first got there, they sit you down in this contraption and they take all these measurements, and your sitting height and your butt to knee and your knee to the floor and your reaching height and all this stuff. And I still remember this big, muscular petty officer with a Mississippi drawl. He said, "Well, Ensign Darren, looks like you're going to be a helicopter pilot." And that is not what I wanted to hear. And he said I was too long, or one of my measurements was out of the parameters. And so I actually met with a flight surgeon the next day. There were a couple of training jets that were in at the base that day, and so we went out and did a cockpit fitting, and it was close, but I got the waiver, and they said, "Okay, we'll let you do that." So that night was a pretty sleepless night, but obviously it worked out.
And there's got to be such a crazy amount of pride. I'm just saying to at a young age say, "This is what I want to do," and go and do it. Not a lot of people get to do that, especially what many would perceive as not just a dream job, but something that's incredibly difficult to achieve. For the audience listening, right? Whether it be a fighter pilot or some other place in the military that you could go, or anything, like from someone who's achieved, right? What would be the advice you'd give someone young who maybe even, in their 30s, who hasn't got to the place they wanted or done? What's something that comes to mind for going about that and getting there?
Yeah. I have to just remind myself how lucky I was to know in my heart of hearts what I wanted to do at a very young age. I was 15, 16 years old, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Now, I didn't necessarily want to do it for my entire career, but that was the first thing I wanted to do with my life. And I think that's the hardest thing. Once you have figured it out and that's what you want, actually doing it, not to say that it's not hard, but if it's something that you want so badly and you're so convinced that that's what you want, you're not going to let anything stop you, right? You're going to run through walls to make that happen. And so that's a pretty rare thing. And it's hard to coach someone to that, because if you have that dream and that vision of this is it, you're going to make it happen. Now, obviously it doesn't always happen, but I think your chances are much better if you know that that's what you want to do. And that's the biggest and the hardest hurdle to clear, is figuring out what is that.
To excel at something, in my opinion, you're always going to lack balance in some area of your life. You obviously excelled in flying the fastest fighter jets out there, and being in a position that, again, probably stories you can't tell and some that you can. Where did that unbalance, did you have unbalance in your life, and what was that about?
I did. It was easier when I was single, unattached. I just had one person to look out for. So balance wasn't really a concern then. But once I got married, and especially once we started having kids, that was definitely an imbalance. Just the amount of time I was gone, my commitment to my job. And I had to be committed and I had to be focused, because it's dangerous. And if you're distracted and your mind's not in the game, bad things happen. So there was definitely some imbalance there. And I would say that I'm gratefully still paying my wife back for those years where she was a great partner in that journey. And she kept the home fires burning, and she knew that her job was equally important, because I couldn't do my job unless she was doing her job really well, taking care of our kids, raising our kids, and dealing with kind of all the things that I didn't have time to deal with, either because I wasn't there or I was just working, really long, late hours.
And were you cognizant of what your wife might be going through while you were, on these dangerous missions?
I was cognizant that she was making a lot of sacrifice, but I also knew she had a great support network. And, again, that's one of the things I think that's unique about the military, especially a really tight-knit organization. It's not just the members of the unit, it's really a family. And for those units to be successful, it can't be just the unit. It's got to be everyone.
Yeah, I feel it all on you, and you said it earlier, and I'll hit on it. the people surrounding you. I mean, you've said it so many times inadvertently and right out there. The people around you make all the difference in the world. It sounds like you had an incredible support cast, and the military also was providing that. And I said, I think to grow, you need good mirrors, and that's the most important thing. And you saw it at a young age, and you got it through your family, and I'm guessing you get it through the Blue Angel Foundation, and also through still, being a Blue Angel, which is pretty incredible. We give to a charity of choice for every guest, $2,500 donation.
Oh,
I'm
fantastic.
sure I can guess, but maybe share with the audience what you'd like to give to, and kind of what that goes to.
Yeah. Well, it's a self-serving request at some level because I'm a board member of the Blue Angel Foundation, but we really do great work for our wounded veterans. Veteran suicide is an issue, continues to be an issue, and part of it is because of all the transition challenges that we talked about. A lot of veterans have a hard time dealing with just not having purpose in their life or not having that support network. And so preventing veteran suicide is one of our missions. Also helping with, career transition, transitional housing for folks that have special needs because of injuries or prosthetics or whatever requires them to have special transitional housing. And, it's a great organization. And, without our military, without, the folks that defend our freedom on a daily basis, we wouldn't have the freedom that we enjoy sitting here today. And just because someone serves, it's not just their time in service, it's life after service. And there are, not for every veteran, but for a lot of veterans, there are special needs that need to be met, both, again, mental and physical, that we're trying to address with the Blue Angel Foundation.
We couldn't be more excited to give to that. And I guess a follow-up question that is, have you been hands-on with veterans who are dealing with the mental side of whatever it may be? Mental health is a big thing right now. It's actually a big part of the podcast, and being honest and open with where we're at. And I would imagine, again, I shared this with you almost just talking before, was at a certain age, we don't share a lot of it. And I would imagine in the military, I don't know, but there's this tough person mentality where you're not necessarily sharing all your feelings. Is that the process a little bit also in this foundation to back to the brotherhood? We're in this together. But have you dealt a lot with that outside of it? And again, either through this foundation or just independently with these tough conversations with this, I mean, I've worked with it with my brother and other people. It's hard. I mean, talk about hard. The hardest thing probably I have to do is talk to someone who's struggling mentally and explain to them all the good things they have in their life or that they've done in their life, and trying to get through to them.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'm not a trained therapist. And so in terms of being hands-on, depends on how you define that. Where I've tried to be helpful is to try to recreate some of that brotherhood. And I use brother as if it's just men, but obviously there are a lot of women that have served honorably and that still face a lot of the same challenges. So I use that term generically, but so I've been part of a couple of unofficial groups that have tried to recreate sort of environments where former veterans, Army, Navy, Air Force, mostly in my case, mostly academy graduates, can get together, fraternity, brotherhood, and just share stories and camaraderie. And so that's really sort of informal, but it's a quarterly gathering that I started with a couple of other veterans several years ago. And that's been a lot of fun. And from that, relationships have been formed and introductions to either business opportunities or other, support groups for different, former members of Army, Navy, Air Force, or special units have kind of formed out of that. So that's been a way that I've tried to give back. And then a lot of times I'm approached by veterans. They're committed to coming to Dallas. They meet someone, they talk to someone. They say, "Well, have you met Jerry Darren yet?" And next thing you know, I'm getting a call or an email. And I try to help them think through, some of the challenges in advance, so they know, hey, this is what you need to expect. And these are some of the things that maybe you need to think about as you're making a career transition that you haven't thought about. And a lot of those folks, in fact, I had a phone call from a 4-star admiral. This was about 8 years ago. And he was a former Blue Angel, and he contacted me and says, Jerry, I've never written a resume and I've never really networked. Can you help me network? This is a 4-star admiral, right? I mean, he could step in and be CEO of a Fortune 500 company tomorrow, but he wanted some help. And so I've tried to do that and be a sort of unofficial mentor to folks that are transitioning out.
What do you think the hardest thing is transitioning out?
I think the hardest thing is figuring out what you want to do. And, I always tell veterans, because again, when you're in the military, you sort of know what your next options are, right? So when I finished my first 3 years of an operational tour, I knew I was either going to be an instructor pilot, flying F-18s, an instructor pilot in the training command. I could go to Top Gun if I was selected for it and be an instructor either there or at the weapons school. I wasn't smart enough to go to test pilot school. So I kind of knew it was going to be one of those. But in the military, when you decide to get out, it's, now you're in the Navy, we called it a detailer, the person that said, well, this is your next assignment. Now you're your own detailer, right? And so I try to help the veterans figure out, hey, what's important to you? Is money the most important thing to you? Maybe it shouldn't be. You've spent the last 5 or 10 or 30 years constantly on the road. Maybe family should be a higher priority. Do you want to live close to family? Maybe where you live is important. Maybe what you do is more important than how much you get paid to do it. So I just try to help them think through that because they've never really had to make those decisions because it was really made for them by the military.
And for someone who's not in the military, don't have a military family background, and I say this in the most respectful way, what do you think people who have not had family in the military are the most naive about, or don't see that, the military brotherhood sees? Like, for example, I would say I'm pretty naive in the fact that Memorial Day, Veterans Day, those are days that are for, active and people who were in the military to celebrate them. And we kind of lose focus on this as like, oh, it's an extra holiday. And I just give that as an example and being vulnerable and saying that, and also saying like, I don't know a lot about the military. It hasn't affected me in my 41 years of life very much. What would you say is like a big misconception or something that the general public misses if they're not, if they haven't experienced some sort of military background?
I mean, I would say the first thing is don't feel sorry for a veteran. I've had conversations over the years with so many veterans, all services, all ranks, officer and enlisted. And when I ask them, are you glad you did it? I've never had a single one say, you know what, I really wish I didn't do that. They've all, a man or a woman has said, I do not regret that. I loved my time in service. And of course, you forget about a lot of the bad stuff and the hardship and the separation and maybe at the moment you don't think about some of those you may have lost along the way. But I think with very few exceptions, veterans are happy that they did what they did. So I think it's important for people to know that. Don't feel sorry for veterans. Obviously, be appreciative for what they did. And then I think a lot of people just don't understand how challenging it can be to transition. Even if you're perfectly healthy and you're an officer and you've got a college education and, you sort of have a clean slate to do whatever you want. And that's pretty similar to what my situation was. It was still hard to make that transition. I still missed a lot of what I left behind in the military. And there were a lot of things that were just different and it was stressful and it caused a lot of angst and sort of a void that my wife and I had because we didn't have that, that squadron family that was always there with us to support us along the way. And now it's just the two of us.
Yeah. And as an outsider, I would say, look, I have incredible respect for the military, incredible. But what's hard from an outsider is just not very relatable, right? When I said, oh, today was a tough day or this went wrong, where I've challenged with this, in a way, I'm like, well, I don't want to complain about that. Or it's not at the level that someone was in the military or did something like that. So again, I give a little bit of reprieve for some people who just can't relate to it,
right,
and don't want to diminish the value of the person that served as well.
Yep.
So
understandable.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank
fun.
you for being on the podcast. Appreciate it. I can't wait to actually take a more interest in the Blue Angels and other things that I just haven't been aware of. And actually, when I meet someone now that has served, I think I will have some different questions about how they kind of transitioned.
Yeah.
I think just knowing that and being aware of that
Mm-hmm.
is an interesting side of the equation. So once again, thank you. Pleasure. I didn't ask you, what was your call sign?
You don't get to pick your call sign, and you don't always stick with the same call sign. So if you do something to really distinguish yourself, usually something stupid or something where you almost get killed, you might get a new call sign. So I had a few along the way. One that stuck with me for quite a while was Farsi. And Farsi is an island in the middle of the Arabian Gulf that's owned by Iran. And we were supposed to maintain a 12 nautical mile standoff. And I flew right over that. I didn't mean to, but I got in a little bit of trouble. I had to go see the boss. And so my call sign was Farsi for the rest of that deployment. That was probably one of the more memorable ones. But JD, which was my initials, as boring as it is, ever since I was in high school, people called me JD.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So cool. Well, thank you again.
You bet. My pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Alex Perry on Fire. It means so much to me and the wonderful team that makes this all possible. I'm now passing the flame to you. Please follow, like, and subscribe so you can always stay up to date. Thanks again, and stay fired up.